Well, hello, everybody. The 2015-2016 is just about upon us. We're here on opening night, coming up in just a few hours. And, well, Dave, it's good to have hockey back. A lot of new changes, but, we saw a lot of what happened over the offseason, and we talked about it, some of it back in the summer. Lou Lamoriello gone, Ray Shero in, new head coach and John Hines. A lot of player movement, bringing a lot of the youth in, but also going after some of those veteran guys to try and make this a competitive team for this year, but really not blocking anyone from showing what they can do, any of those young players. So there's a lot of turnover over the summer, but I think everyone's really, I haven't seen anyone down or disappointed or whatever you want to call it. Everyone seems to be pretty excited for the season, even though we know the expectations are a bit tapered, so to speak.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about a rebuilding season, and that though the expectations for this team are not high, no one's expecting them to be a playoff team. In some regards, a rebuilding season, especially with new faces everywhere, from the GM, coach, and even some of the players that are either new to the team or at least like Boucher and Matteau are going to probably see bigger minutes this year. There's something that sometimes is enjoyable about that, because you're kind of blazing a new trail where, maybe you're not anywhere in contention, but what if Reid Boucher goes out and scores 22 goals this year and you start to feel really good about him? There's certain moments within a rebuilding season that can be enjoyable. And I think that's what fans are looking forward to. And certainly, myself as well, that even though the expectations aren't there, sometimes it's fun just because you don't know what's going to happen because of so many new faces.
Yeah, and I think the unknown definitely brings a sense of a joy and I think a reason to go to the rink every night, because there's some new guys. We want to see what Kyle Palmieri can do. He's a Jersey kid. What can he do this year? Yuri Talusti is a guy who actually had some really nice seasons in Carolina. For whatever reason, wasn't really tendered a contract. The Devils got him late. Who knows? He could end up being a potential stud player, and if that happens, then as he's been slotted on the third line for most of practices during training camp in the preseason. But, if he continues that, or maybe he takes another step, he's still a relatively young guy. He takes another step. Maybe you found yourself a nice second-line player, and then you're not too far away from filling out those top two lines. And with a decent third and fourth line, then maybe you're right in the mix there for a playoff spot within a year or two if some of these guys take the next step. Sergei Kalinin, he had pretty good reviews coming over from the KHL, still a bit of an unknown, so we'll see what he's all about. You kind of know what you have on the bottom with Gianta and Ruutu. I wouldn't expect really too much from those guys, but like you mentioned, Boucher, and it's time to sink or swim for some of the kids. And Boucher hasn't seen Boucher and Matteau really haven't seen a lot of time comparatively for how long they've been in the organization, but they're probably going to get, I would think, at least 40, talking maybe 50, 60 some games to show what they've got here, even if it's on the fourth line, to show a little bit, and then maybe it'll come time to cut bait with some of the forwards and move in a different direction.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about it is you have these two guys, not including the people who were brought in, the Palmieris and such, but really looking at Boucher and Matteau, this is their year. We've seen Boucher do what he did in Sarnia, and everyone was kind of bullish on him for a while. But he has to do it this year. If he's not going to this year, you have to think, oh, well, maybe the cupboard is more bare than we think. And in the same regard, if he comes out, and Matteau as well, though Matteau I still think is much more of a support third line checking kind of player who maybe will develop some sort of good penalty killing skills and can be more of a grit player. But for Boucher, we have to see that good wrist shot turn into goals at some point. And for them to feel good about moving forward next year, especially considering the cupboard is still kind of bare outside of maybe a Blandisi and Zaka and stuff like that. They need to see Boucher do something, I think, just because right now you would think he'd be the most NHL-ready guy to step in and kind of fill the void that the Devils haven't had for a while with an elite scorer, and maybe he's the guy.
And I'll tell you what, I'm excited about the defense. I am. I know Andy Green. I'd say he had maybe a bit of a dip last year, but he was still extremely steady. I think Adam Larson is still growing. I think John Moore is a steady guy, and I think he's going to provide some stability. He's a younger guy age-wise, but he already has a lot of NHL experience. I think he'll be that good combination of of youth with some speed, but also a little bit of a veteran head on there to provide some stability for the young guys. I'm interested to see where John Merrill goes. He played so well 2 seasons ago in limited time, and then he had a bit of more expanded role last year, and he struggled really after like the 20-game mark. He struggled really towards to the end of the season. So I want to see if he can kind of jump into the next, take another step forward, even if it's a small step, just a step.
He looked good in the preseason, though. He really
yeah.
had.
Yeah, so I mean, even just a step in the right direction, doesn't even have to be a big stride this year. Just to see some improvement would be good. And then Damon Severson, he was their best defenseman until he had the leg injury, and then when he came back, he didn't quite look right, which is understandable. When I believe it was either a fracture or a break somewhere in his ankle or shin, it's tough to come back and be totally 100% every night. So I would think that full off season of rest will put him hopefully back on track to where he was for those first few weeks of last season. And then David Schlemko, they brought in some guys and they stashed some guys in the AHL. And David Schlemko is a new face, and he's had success elsewhere in the Western Conference, and I think he'll be a good mix as well. He's a relatively young guy too. You're talking pretty much everyone besides Andy Green's under 30 on this defensive front.
Yeah, defensively, I think you have to really feel confident that they're going to take another step forward. We saw what Adam Larson, by the way, I did post it the other day. Jeff, did you get to see the Adam Larson video? A bunch of his friends out in Skellefteå, they were singing a song about Adam Larson being an Eagle.
I saw you post that. I thought you were just like drunk one night. I didn't know.
No. It's actually a video apparently that a bunch of guys from his hometown posted singing about Adam Larson being an Eagle. So
those are his friends,
or something like guys who know him, or I don't know, guys from his town of Skellefteå out in Sweden. So I thought that was fun.
Wow, that's different. And I'll tell you what, Lou Lamoriello is gone, and there's all types of social media craziness going on or viral videos. And the Devils have just been posting videos nonstop of the guys, telling fans to come out to the Fan Fest or that they're excited to see them at the game. It's like a whole new environment without
the Twitter machine.
Yeah. That holy smoke! Did you get a chance to go to any of that? I figured you.
I didn't. I was gonna go one of the days it was in Newark, and I didn't get a chance to go, but I'm sure it'll be around.
Yeah, that seemed like a pretty fun thing. They did do some of that when Lamoriello was there. I mean, if people remember during the 2012 Cup run. I can't remember if it was during the Fly. It must have been during the Fly. It was at the end of the Florida series, maybe the beginning of the Flyer series. Pete DeBoer, before the end of the season, said, mentioned the phrase "swarm it up," and it kind of took on a life of its own. There was T-shirts made. The players were wearing "swarm it up" T-shirts, and then it went viral to the fans where they were putting lawn signs. It had the Devils logo. It had the hashtag "swarm it up," and I guess it was a Devils street team or some of the marketing department. They would go whatever hours of the morning or night, and anyone who wanted one on their front lawn, they would kind of take inventory, and they would go out and then place them down on people's lawns and patches. So there's been things like this, before Lou Lamoriello left the organization. But it's fun to see. It's fun to see them being a little bit more young and hip, a little bit more modern. Because really, we talk about Devils fans. It really is a 30 and under group for the most part. This is the team they. Anyone really 30 and under, maybe you could expand a bit higher than that age-wise. All they've known is the Devils. There's a portion of Devils fans. Like my dad, he was. I wouldn't say he was a Rangers fan, but he definitely rooted for the Rangers before the Devils came to town. There's a segment of the fan base that were Islanders or Rangers fans that then turned to Devils fans when they came to the area. Really, the group we're kind of in, all they've known is Devils hockey, and they're the ones you kind of need to be marketing to. They're kind of the future of the fan base.
Yeah, and the one thing that I really like about the idea of the players being more accessible is that you form another sort of connection as fans with the players and the team if they're more accessible. You get to kind of see a little bit about these guys' lives. You get to, and certainly people have interacted with the players based on some of the things they've done. I saw guys like Corey, taking selfies with fans and stuff before one of the games, and that's fun, and that's how you build fans. Either if it's a kid that's going to his first game and he gets to see something that's a little bit more different and unique and he becomes a fan, or even people who just become bigger fans because the team is accessible and it gives them a really unique moment. That's a good thing, and especially when the product on the ice isn't going to be quite as good. Certainly not trying to make an excuse for it, but I think that when you can do something else to keep the fans engaged, if the team isn't going to be quite there, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and you can certainly see that from now with Lamoriello leaving. It seems that players are definitely more accessible. A lot of the players have created Twitter accounts. Keith Kincaid, Steven Gianta. Most notably, I would say the most notable guy on the team who's picked up a Twitter since the offseason is Adam Henrique. And it's fun to see these guys actually, have a personality outside of the hockey rink. I think one of the first things Henrique tweeted was at Steven Gianta asking him if he grew any height at all in the offseason, which is just hilarious because the Devils fans really, they've had to, imagine or, try and guess what players are like outside of the locker room. And now they can see a little bit of that, which is kind of fun. And then, you got the players with all the high numbers now. There's guys with numbers in the 40s, 50s, and, that number 13 is no longer locked by Lou Lamoriello. Mike Camilleri's got it. So a lot of changes, and I know there's a lot of stuff that kind of made the Devils different in a sense. Even I don't think this really has been talked about much. Every Devils player had to wear their helmet during pregame warm-up. Kovalchuk, before he came here, was a guy who notoriously let his locks flow in the breeze. And now pretty much, there's no constraints on that at all. Guys would have their chin straps unlocked. That was about as much as they could loosen their ties, so to speak, during pregame warmups. Now they don't even have to wear their helmets during pregame warmups. So a lot of things have changed, and I like that. It kind of gives the fan base a little bit closer look at the guys. As weird as it sounds, they can, they don't just see a face from far away and wearing a hockey jersey. You can see their hair, how they style it, something like that. It just gives the fans a little bit closer connection, and you can kind of see the players personally, so to speak, as just maybe professionally.
Yeah, it's certainly a good thing. I think anything they can do to help build this team up for the next couple of years while they're rebuilding is a good thing, because when you're good and you've done the work to get the people involved, and all of a sudden in say 2 or 3 years they're putting a winning product on the ice, then you almost have a better appreciation of it. So I think that they're building not only on the ice but off the ice towards something new and exciting. I think that's what you can kind of take away from all this so far.
And really, it culminating in the last few days with the announcement of Martin Brodeur jersey retirement night. The date leaked out a day early, and boy, that was a fun frenzy. The day before the announcement, Tom Galletti wrote that it was February 9th it's expected to be February 9th against the Oilers. People were buying tickets. People were bombarding him with messages saying, "Are you sure? Are you positive that's the night?" I was doing the same thing because normally Galletti's normally right in everything he posts news-wise, but then the announcement leaked out early, and then the announcement happened yesterday, and I believe it was a season ticket holder event with Brodeur there. The announcement, everything, there was a whole bunch of people, pretty much a ton of Devils players were there. So everything kind of culminating now. I think the big change, is over now. Marty's going to get his night, and now there's really nothing to talk about really from the past. Really, if you don't, Lou Lamoriello is in a new spot. Marty Brodeur is going to get his number retired. He's going to go back to his job, and that's pretty much going to, kind of close the door on the past for the most part, and which is a good thing. You're tying off all the loose ends.
Yeah, it is a little bit scary perhaps because you don't know necessarily where the ownership is going and Ray Shero, but I think everything you've seen from these guys is that they want to win. They want to make the product more than just on the ice, which is good to an extent, of course. And, in terms of Shero, I think they're in good hands. I really do. And to me, if you're worried about the future of this team because there's just no connections to the old guard, I think Shero is the reason why you have to really feel good because he's a proven winner. He only left Pittsburgh because they got fed up with not winning a cup every year, basically, and they expected to win. But he put together a really good team. And I think he's going to be a guy. Look at the moves he made. He made the moves that were the right moves for this team for this year. Sure, maybe people wanted him to break the bank for someone, but there was not much out there. And especially what's coming up next year, I think his prudent spending went a long way. So, if you look at that, and though it's a season where there's uncertainty because it's very, very different, to say they're not your father's Devils, I mean, that won't really work, but they're not 3 years ago's Devils by far. I mean, it's so, so, so different, especially with Patrick Elias not even being here right now because of his injury. I mean, it's just such a different situation, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not. And I think he's done a good job. And let's kind of talk about the general construction of the roster. What I liked most what he did in the offseason and what Lou Lamoriello was, kind of guilty for was offering players multi-year deals that maybe weren't worthy of multi-year deals. The 2-2 contract, I guess, was partially under Lou. That was getting finalized before Shiro took over the reins completely. But 2-2 on a 1-year contract. Tulosti 1-year contract. Same for Lee Stempniak, even Sergei Kalinin, an unknown product from overseas. They didn't overspend really for anyone. And I think that's you're gonna see now is them be a lot more fiscally responsible. Kyle Palmieri's on a great contract for this year, given his short track record. He's a restricted free agent next year, and even if he gets a big bump in salary arbitration, it still should be a sizably, a controllable number for the most part. He's not going to jump all the way to $4 or $5 million. He'll probably get him.
You know what you have to like right now is the hunger that's on this roster.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it this way. You have a guy like Travis Zajac, highest player on the team right now, but he's hungry to prove that he's worth the contract. Mm-hmm. Kyle Palmieri is playing for a new contract next year. Even going down the list from Jacob Josephson, who wants to prove himself. Lee Stempniak, who is playing for a contract next year at this point. Jiri Tulosti, who I'm sure would love a long-term deal, and he'll have to play his way to get a long-term deal. Kalinin, same situation. And even a guy like Boucher moving forward and Matteau who are going to want bigger deals. You have to like the fact that at least offensively that these guys are going to be hungry to do something because there's stuff at stake, and that's why the 1-year deals are nice because it kind of holds the carrot out on the stick and makes guys have to work for a contract for next year.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. You got all the young guys in the mix defensively. The goaltending is as short up as it is. I know people were talking about a long rebuild. I think with the money they take off the books, if they make one key free agent signing next year, I think they're going to be right in the mix. I think they're going to be right in the mix potentially next year for a playoff spot. I've kind of already had this year in my mind as a throwaway year. Once you get Ruutu off the books, you get him, you get Elias. I have to go back and check and see what the Zubris payout is like. I think it only cost them money this year. I don't think it cost them any money next year, which is good. So they'll have money to spend on hopefully a free agent in the prime of his career, not a guy who's over 30. That would be nice. And then I think they'll be right back in the mix next year. I don't think we're talking about a very long rebuild for this team.
Yeah, I do think that they, at least from right now, what you look at it, if guys take the steps forward this year, that they could very well be in a spot where they make an addition or two and feel really good. I mean, here's a comparison for this team. I know that they don't have a Shea Weber, but Adam Larson, the way he finished last year, there's many who think that he's going to have a very, very good year. Again, no one is Shea Weber, but what about this team mirroring the success of last year's Nashville Predators? I know, different conference, different division, but if you look at that team, they were kind of scoring by committee. Philip Forsberg, the rookie, was their main guy who did most of their scoring. They weren't very deep offensively, but they're very, very good at. They had elite puck movers on that defense, and I think that's where you're seeing this team become with the likes of Larson, even in a Merrill, and to a lesser extent, of course, Severson too, but even John Moore can move the puck. And they have the goaltending if you want to compare them. And look how many points the Nashville Predators finished. They had over 100 points last year. So to me, if you want to look at a model of a team that can win with good defense and good goaltending and kind of find enough scoring, you don't have to look much further than what the Nashville Predators did last year. Sure, they kind of tailed off at the end, but I think it does prove that even something like next year, that if you can do enough defensively with good players and a good goaltender, you find enough scoring, sometimes good things happen for you.
Yeah, I think they're going to be. I don't think they're going to be as bad this year as everyone thinks they're going to be. I see a lot of people having them slotted for 8th place, 7th place, which is probably about the norm. But I don't think there's any reason they can't be, perhaps 6th. I don't think any team like obviously the Hurricanes, I think, are a worse team than the Devils, but I don't think the Flyers are, that much better of a hockey team than the Devils. I don't see there's no reason they can't finish 6th, maybe challenge for 5th. I don't think a playoff spot's reasonable. I think everyone's come to grips with that, but I don't think they're an automatic basement dweller like most people have them in this year. But let's get to the Twitter questions. We have some of them from our faithful followers, and let's start with Malik at Sir Sophomore. Do you believe, like I do, that this will be the breakout year for Jacob Josephson and the year that Boucher steps up? Well, I think we've seen a lot more promise in what Jacob Josephson can do because he is so versatile, so to speak. He can give you a penalty kill time. He can fit in with good players around him. He can also grind it out with players on the bottom two lines. So I think you're going to see him evolve as a player who's comfortable and consistent in the lineup. I'm not sure he's going to be a 15, 20 goal scorer, but I think maybe he'll produce at a clip that's good enough to keep him around where he's an adequate piece on the bottom two lines. So maybe something like 10 goals, maybe 30 assists, something like that, where he'll be a serviceable, about a half-point game player. I don't know what's considered breakout for him now, considering he's been in the organization so long. But I think he'll be very consistent, and that's what I would consider a breakout year.
Yeah, I have really high hopes for him, to be honest. I like his speed game. I think growing up in the system that he did, he has the defensive ability as well. He can kill penalties. He's such an asset in the shootout and even in the 3-on-3 for that matter. He's going to get major minutes this year, and that's the thing. I mean, you look at him right now. He's on, as what they've done in practice, he's on a line with Adam Henrique and Lee Stempniak as a second-line center. I mean, he's a guy who right now, if you look at where he's slotted right now, Hines expects a big season out of him. If he's your second-line center, okay, so just looking at different line changes for today.
But change, even on Thursday, so I mean, it's a pretty decent shakeup.
But he's still there. He's still there. I like that line though, the Henrique, Palmieri, Josephson line. I really like because Josephson's a guy who can pass the puck, and he has two guys who can finish and can also kind of move with it as well. I think that could be a pretty dynamic line, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I like it, and I see what they're trying to do. So the normal training camp practice lines have been altered a bit from earlier in the week, and here's what they were as of Thursday morning. So we saw it was Camilleri, Zajac, Palmieri. It's now Camilleri, Zajac, and Stempniak on the first line. Second line, Henrique on the wing with Josephson in the middle, Palmieri. And then Boucher and Talusti on the outside of Sergei Kalinin. And then you have Ruutu, Gianta, and Tutu on the fourth line, which I like a little bit better. Give a little bit more ice time to Boucher, Talusti, Kalinin. I think you know what you're getting in Ruutu, Gianta, and Tutu on that fourth line. So I'd kind of let them sit there. But, give Boucher a little more ice, give Kalinin, Talusti a little more ice. Obviously, Matteau seems to be an extra skater at this point, perhaps as will be Brian O'Neill. We'll see what his future's like. But I think that's a little bit better. Having Tutu on the third line, was okay considering the year he had last year, but you might as well be having the other guys. Let him on the fourth line. You can always shake it up later in the game, too. You can, jump him on the third line if Boucher is slacking or Talusti's not up to form.
But to me, though, we always talk about DeBoer and the shuffling he did with the lines. I think that I like these lines a lot. Granted, what does it matter really what I think? But if Hines likes these lines, I think no matter if they go out and lose 6-0 to Winnipeg in game one, which I don't think will be the case, but I think you have to stick with the lines for a little bit. It's so many new guys, and it's also new guys and old guys learning a new system that you can't expect anything to click right away. And I think the worst thing would be for them to go, all right, it's Camilleri, Zajac, Stempniak, and then game two, it's Henry, Camilleri, and someone else, where right. I think you have to, especially in a season where there's no real expectations, let things take time, let them take the time they need to grow. Throw away the key for a little bit. If Kalinin, Boucher, and Talusti, who, they have some skill altogether, if it takes them a few games to really gel, so be it.
What, Dave, you're not excited for when Eric Jelena gets benched, everyone going in a rage on Devils Twitter? That doesn't excite you?
I mean, it's going to happen. And I like the idea of Schlemko there because it does put the pressure on Merrill, even Severson and Jelena that, look, if you're not pulling your weight, there's another guy who could step in for you. So, look, Jelena, I think, admittedly didn't have a great preseason, and there's a reason for it, but I'm sure we'll see enough of him.
At Cami Buns says, who do you think will be taken out of the lineup for Elias when he returns? Man, I'll tell you what. Last year at the end, Elias was on the third or fourth line for DeBoer. I really can't tell you at this point what John Hines thinks of him. I'm sure he doesn't have enough of a sample size. I really don't know where he would kind of fit at this point, considering I think you've got everything figured out you kind of want figured out. I mean, Elias is a winger. I mean, I guess for the most part, if you wanted to, you could throw him in on the third line, bump someone down to the fourth, and then kind of move on in that regard. But really, if you're doing that, you are kind of blocking a younger player. If you put Elias on that third line, you're talking about Boucher, Talusti dropping down to the fourth. I mean, for me, I'm not sure where, they've constructed this roster with a lot of depth in theory, but I'm not sure. I mean, for me, you're probably talking about, as weird as it sounds, a guy who's on the first line right now. Maybe Lee Stempniak is one of the odd guys out. I can't really see them taking out anyone else at this point. They signed Tutu to a new contract. I think they have plans for him to be in the lineup every night. I mean, you could try and, maybe they'll waive Ruutu and they'll stash him down in the minors. I mean, his money will still count against the cap, but maybe if someone takes them off their hands, they'll be happy to just let him go. I think that may be what happens at this point, because at some point, it's the last year of his deal. I really don't think the Devils care. At some point, I think you might just try and see if you can sneak him through waivers, and then you can put him down in the AHL and, kind of do things that way.
Yeah, I think my take on it is you put Elias on long-term injured reserve if you can. And I know this is kind of a brash statement.
Won't bring him back at all?
I just don't know where he fits into this team right now, and I don't think it makes sense unless you're going to put him on the fourth line. Right. And what's that really going to do? Because it's not like he brings any sort of physical game anyway. I just don't know. And look, in a week we might know something, or a week or two we might know something very different. I mean, look, they could be really, really struggling, and all of a sudden it looks like Elias might be a benefit to this team. But if they're doing good things throughout the first three lines and they're starting to gel, I don't know if it's a good thing to bring him back and put him in one of those lines, to be quite honest, especially because he's not, unfortunately, going to be part of the future of this team. Just as, with a guy like Bryce Salvador that might have been able to possibly play last year if he wanted to. They got rid of him to let the young defenseman come up. I hate to say it, but if the early returns on this lineup are better than we expected, I wouldn't be so quick to bring him back, to be quite honest.
Wow, interesting. Well, let's see how that plays out. So, I mean, if I had it my way, it would be Ruutu. If I had to guess, though, it might be someone who's really not going to potentially be here long-term, like Stempniak, even though he's on the first line as of Thursday morning practices. All right, last Twitter question, and it comes from Kevin Sardi. Which new face are you most excited to watch? Well, there's a couple of them, Dave. We talked about them. There's Palmieri, there's John Moore, Yuri Talusti, Sergei Kalinin. For me, I guess the obvious one is kind of Palmieri, but I'll say Yuri Talusti because I think he's a wild card to this lineup. He's played like a top six forward at times in Carolina. I think Kyle Palmieri, what you're getting for the most part. Obviously, I think there's a bit more of a ceiling for him, but I think Talusti is kind of the wild card to this whole thing. He could end up being a total flop and maybe be out of the NHL in a few years, but I think if he hits his ceiling, he's a consistent top six player every night on the forward list. So for me, for that reason, in general, I guess that's the guy I'm most excited to see because there's a lot of his game to either be unlocked or, totally decline very quickly, depending how he pans out here.
Let's just hope he doesn't take a page out of Damian Brunner's book. That's
for
sure.
My God.
I will agree. I think Talusti has a really high ceiling. I think he's a player that could be very, very good, especially if he kind of regains his footing and maybe becomes a part of this team when it's good. I think you could see him putting up really good numbers. But for me, it's actually going to be Lee Stempniak. He's a guy who I've wanted as a Devil for a few years now, especially even going back to when they were good or at least in the playoff hunt. He's not a guy who's going to wow you. He's not going to put up 30 goals, but he's a competitor. He's gritty. He has a game that he can kind of make work with a lot of different players, which I think is nice about that they can move him from line to line and he'll still be able to play pretty well. I like him. I think he's a good veteran presence that will help this team just because he's been there before. He's been on a bunch of different teams, and though his numbers aren't going to wow you, I do think that he's going to be a good soldier for this team this year.
All right, with that, let's start to wrap things up, Dave. Let's give some predictions for the season. And normally in years past, we've had them in the playoffs, guessing what round they'll be to. I don't think that'll quite be the same this year unless you've had a lot to drink this morning. But I would say for me, last year by comparison, let's give everyone those numbers. They had 32 wins, 36 losses, 14 overtime shootout losses for a total of 78 points in those 82 games. 7th placed inside the Metropolitan Division. I don't think they're going to be too far off from that this year. I think Corey Schneider's good enough to win games. There's, like you said, there's a lot of youth and hunger that qualify into that whole relentless hashtag that's taken over the Devils' Twitter and the Devils' marketing scheme. I think they are very much going to play like that. I think they'll cut down on the regulation losses by a good amount. I think they'll have even maybe more overtime shootout losses this year. But I think the win total will stay right around the same. So for me, I'll say the Devils end up with 30 wins, about 70 points flat. And I think, well, I did say I wanted them finishing ahead of the Flyers. So maybe they'll finish tied with the Flyers with 70 points, and the Devils hold the tiebreaker to, in theory, be in sixth place. So that's what I'll say. 70 points, tied for sixth in the Metropolitan Division. What about you?
I think very similar to what you're saying, but I do think that they have a chance to win some of these 3-on-3 overtimes and some of these shootouts, at least this year, with some of the guys they have now, with a Boucher and a Josephson in the lineup. So I think they might gain a few more points that they had lost last year in that regard. Mm-hmm. But I do think they're going to struggle early on. It's a new system. It's going to take time. I think they'll start to play some good hockey after the new year. But I would say 74 points, which might be good enough for sixth. But honestly, I think they're probably going to be the seventh place team in that division. The Flyers do look like they'll at least be somewhat competitive. So I'm going to go 74 points. I think they might end up with a couple more wins, to be honest. But I think you're going to see more, maybe same amount of wins or more, but less overtime losses and just more games where they just get outplayed and lose in regulation as well. I think you're just going to see a far smaller number of those overtime losses, which was 18 last year. So,
right, agreed. Well, that'll just about do it. Enjoy the season, Devils fans. Final thoughts from me. I'm just going to kick back and enjoy watching some young players grow. This is the first year I can't say I'm really worried about making the playoffs, worried about wins, losses, lineup changes, roster changes, things going on in the front office. I am just going to kick back and enjoy the hockey season, enjoy watching, hopefully, John Merrill, Adam Larson take more strides, hoping that Kyle Palmieri's a good fit with this club, hoping Travis Zajac finds his way back. So for me, I'm enjoying the individual storylines. I'm going to hope for improvement all around so that this way they won't be too far off for contending for the playoffs in 2016, 2017. Dave, what about you?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. Have fun with this season. I know it's a little bit very different than we've ever experienced as Devils fans, where there's no expectations of the playoffs. But I'll say this, in 3 or 4 years when they're good, or dare I say when they win a cup in the next decade, you'll remember this season when it all kind of changed and when some of these young guys that become your stars perhaps really started to find their footing. Just enjoy the ride, because sometimes, we've never seen this as Devils fans where you have to build up and get to that point because we've been so used to seeing a good team for a while. But sometimes there's a lot to enjoy about a rebuilding year because you see things that exceed your expectations. So it's going to be a fun year.
With that, folks, enjoy opening night. The Devils hosting the Winnipeg Jets at 7 o'clock. I know there's Fan Fest going on. At 4, there's a red carpet for the players' arrival, which should be a blast for those in attendance. Hopefully it's a sellout. Hopefully the fans are into it and make it loud. And hopefully we'll start the season off 1-0 and, kind of just enjoy things from there. So for Dave Turner, I'm Jeff O'Connor. The Devils Insiders podcast is back. We'll be back probably next week or sometime in the next few weeks as we see how the Devils perform in the early going here. We'll talk to you then. Have a good one, folks, and enjoy the 2015-2016 season.